All right, good morning, folks. My name is Zachary Payne. I'm here in San Antonio, part of AFCEC, and I have with me Mr. Brian Steins. He's also here in San Antonio, part of AFICA. All right, good morning, folks. My name is Zachary Payne. I'm here in San Antonio, part of AFCEC, and I have with me Mr. Brian Steins. He's also here in San Antonio, part of AFICA. We're coming to you today to talk about the construction tasking order process. Before we get started, kind of lay out some ground rules, and you might have seen it in the chat box there. But all the audio, we'll be presenting it over DCO. If you have questions on anything we're covering, please type them into the chat box, and we'll hit them either throughout the presentation or at the end. But if you have questions, type them out, and then we'll answer them via DCO so that everyone can hear the answer out there. So we're coming from you from San Antonio. For everyone out there in the States, good morning. I see we have some USAFE folks over in Europe. Good afternoon to you guys. Thanks for staying a little late for this. What we're talking to you about is the construction tasking order process. And to kind of frame it a little bit, you know, my background, I came from, prior to coming to AFCEC, I was a deputy BCE and engineering flight chief at the base. Prior to that. So that's kind of my background. So this hits home with me because it's execution, and to me this process basically lays out what we do every day at the base in terms of teaming with contracting, teaming with FM, and executing requirements. So hopefully you can see some of the similarities in this process and how we're laying it out for you. So upfront strategic intent, you know, the purpose of this, and this is kind of what we briefed to the Installation Executive Council, to the 3 stars out there, is that we're going to establish a comprehensive, sustainable, and transparent process for the centralized funding of the portfolio. So big picture, the centralized program, Air Force has chosen to accept risk in our infrastructure. Our budget numbers, and you guys are well aware, have been dropping, and in FY15 we expect them to be historically low, but the bad part about that is the trend is expected to continue. So to mitigate that, the Air Force decided to centralize a bunch of the money and execute it from the Air Force wide look, where we can make sure that every dollar is spent on the next best thing for the Air Force versus distributing it through the MAJCOMs and letting them do that. So asset management at the Air Force level. And how we do that, we've developed a model. You guys have seen that as well in terms of the risk model, risk to mission, risk to force, and the other piece in there is cost savings. And so that's the model. That's what's being used to prioritize all infrastructure requirements across the Air Force. And that's the way forward. So that's the strategic intent, is to lay that out there, but the construction tasking order cycle is kind of the foundation of that. It is the plan to take that from a concept at the centralized level to get it out to you guys to decentralize, decentrally execute it in the field. So construction tasking order, it's a familiar process, but 2 of the key points to centralization that were briefed and the selling points on saying, yeah, we should do this, is that A, the Air Force should be able to finally practice asset management by funding the worst first, and part 2, that we'd be able to move our obligations to the left in the year, earlier in the year, because we're going to have some improved planning over a 2-year cycle. You know, so for you guys at the base, I know I would love that when we got to end of year and we were just sitting and waiting because everything that we'd had was already awarded, or those that we were taking a little risk on and shooting for some fallout dollars, they were sitting there with a bid in hand and we were ready. But the key is that we wanted to execute our program early so that we could work on some of those other things and have them ready at end of year. And that's what we want to do with our program from the centralized perspective. We want to look at the whole program, and we want to execute it in the 2nd and 3rd quarter, if not sooner, so that we can go back and ask for more money. And typically, instead of having an unfunded list at the end of the year, we would be in the process of leaning forward, being proactive, and actually buying down next year's program. So instead of being reactive, coming to it late to need, we'd be proactive and laying it out there. So obviously both of these concepts are no-brainers, but we haven't been able to take them into they haven't come to fruition yet. We haven't been able to make them a reality yet in the first couple years of centralization. And a big reason for that is the lack of a clear, concise, and repeatable process, so that we can develop a battle rhythm, but even more importantly, so that you guys understand the process at the installations, and you understand the ground rules, and you have some targets to track to. And that's kind of what this is going to lay out. So the construction tasking order cycle, it's very similar to something that we do very good in the Air Force, and that is the air tasking order cycle that we execute every day in the AOR. Not quite one-to-one, not quite the same thing, but you know what? It lines up pretty close. So on the front end, you have your strategic intent. We have that too. We have general officers telling us where we need to spend our money and what's important to them. And in turn, we have to go develop a requirements list and a prioritizing process that kind of meets that intent. That's no different. So when we do that, we're building a target. So in the AOR, they're going to go get X number of targets that they're going to try to get after in a day. Well, we're doing the same thing over a fiscal year. We have those high priority Air Force requirements that we want to get at to address our infrastructure, our high risk, our worst first stuff. From that, in the AOR, it's all about the right weapon, whether that's the aircraft, whether that's, missiles, whatever that is. It's the right weapon and tools to achieve the desired effect. So how does that compare to the construction process? Well, we have a ton of different contract vehicles out there that are accessible to us. We have agents, between the base, between AFCEC, between outside the Air Force with the Corps and NAFAC. We have a lot of different agents that bring a little different piece to the fight. So it's important that when we're determining how to execute a requirement, that we're looking at the best fit for that requirement. And then from that, we align our resources, and that's where the time on target happens in the CTO development process. And this piece in the AOR, well, just because your number one target is your number one target doesn't mean that you do that first and then you do the rest of your targets, right? So if your number one target requires a night strike, we're going to attack that at night when it's the best time for it. That doesn't mean we're going to pass up number 2 through 10. We're still going to get at those when it's the right time. Same thing for us in our process. We know that a SABRE requirement or an IDIQ requirement is a quick win for us. We're really good at that. We can put together a statement of work and we can knock it out, very quickly. Well, we want to obligate that and we want to do that stuff up front. But if we have a complex competitive acquisition that is, multi-million dollars, we know that also that's going to take some time. We have to deal with the whole acquisition process. Maybe we have to go clarify. We have RFIs through the bid process. Maybe we have people that are filing a claim that they didn't get a fair shake in the bid process. We have to deal with all of that, but we know that takes more time, and so we're going to lay that out accordingly in terms of establishing our time on target dates. And then finally, it's all about execution, where we hand it off to you guys and let you guys do what you do best, and that's execute requirements. And then on the back end, obviously, we do some assessment and make it better the next year. Next slide, targeting. This is one area, especially on the contracting side, we've heard a lot about is like, CE comes up with these models and they're changing every year, So one thing's important one year, but next year it's nowhere near the top of the list, and it's a real pain in the butt. And we agree. And so that's something that we've been working hard on here at AFCEC in close coordination with all the MAJCOMs to develop a repeatable process that focuses on two main things. And I won't belabor this slide because you've seen a version of it, I'm sure. But probability of failure is on the x-axis, and that's basically how likely an asset is to fail based on age, condition, etc. And then consequence of failure on the y-axis, and that is how important that asset is to the mission. So if it does fail, what happens to the mission? And between those two things, we have a risk score, and that's what we're going to use to prioritize requirements. There's a third component there with savings, and the key there is in similar risk situations, we want to make good business decisions for the Air Force. And so that's the process, but the key foot stomp here is consistency. As I mentioned, prioritization models have been changing since they were first used, and it's kind of based on what was trending. Was it risk to mission? Was it life, health, safety? Was it fire suppression systems? Whatever the trend of the day is what we targeted, and that is so reactive. So the goal now going forward is that we're going to be proactive, and this was just briefed to the 3 stars at the Installation Executive Council, and while it might be tweaked from year to year, they loved it. And so that's a good thing for us, so that we can establish a front-end prioritized process that everyone's familiar with and that's not going to be changing every year. So from that, and I see the DCO is a little delayed. We had some fancy flying bubbles here, but from that we develop a targeting list. All right, and it is what it is. We go in there and get the risk score, and you can see that in the slide when it pops up. Is a score from basically max at 210 and all the way down. Obviously this is notional data, but that's what we're going to do. It's going to be an integrated priority list of our high priority targets that we want to get after in the next 2 fiscal years. From there we look at the weaponering piece that I spoke about briefly. Weaponering is all about what contracting vehicles best achieve the desired effect. You know, like I said, we have multiple agents out there. Do they have capacity and capability? We want to do the bulk of our work at the base because you guys are the best at it, but at the same time we need feedback from you. Can you handle it? Is it in your bailiwick? Are you missing a lead electrical engineer, so I can't really get after it, get after an electrical project or electrical infrastructure repair, and I need help there? Well, okay, that's what we need to know, and based on that, if you can't handle it, I bet there's someone out there that can. And that's the key there is that we want to establish is what is the best vehicle for achieving the desired effect, and we slide those in. There's your method, there's your agent. It's all about the appropriate method and vehicle. And then again, other things we're looking at from the big picture is small business goals and a deliberate approach to make sure that Air Force is executing Air Force stuff first and maximizing our resources prior to going outside the Air Force. And that's important to us, right? Because we have those resources available to us. We want to make sure that they're employed to the maximum extent possible before we send money elsewhere. Once we have the weaponeering done, the back end of that is establishing those time on target dates. And so those dates are when we expect a requirement to be in our hands, ready to fund. So that's a key foot stomp there is the time on target dates that are going to be laid out there in the CTO process are essentially when we expect you to have sent us a request for funds that tells us that you are ready to award a project as soon as we send you money. And those dates, as I mentioned before, are going to be developed. They're going to be coordinated on, but we're going to set them in stone. And what that does for us is it sets a milestone out there for you to track to. You know, from my perspective, being an engineering flight chief, developing my battle rhythm and allocating my resources, my project managers to different projects, that was a key piece to that, right? I needed authority on the front end, so I needed my customer coming in that had the good idea. Well, I also wanted them to come in and show me the money so that I knew I had money to put towards this requirement on the front end. But on the back end, I also wanted to know kind of expectations. Were there dates when I know Kidden needed to award a contract or the funds went away? Was there something out there where we had to execute a requirement and be done by a certain time so that someone could move in? Those are key dates and milestones out there that are used to resource our program accordingly. So by doing this for you guys in the field, setting those dates out there, well, now you have a target to shoot for. So when you sit down weekly with your contracting office and your FM and your meeting and discussing the plan for the year, well, you have those targets out there so you can prioritize the resources accordingly to make sure that they're effectively getting there to achieve the time on target. So what does that all do to us when we go to the execution phase? Well, the first thing that it does for us is it enables us to basically build a battle rhythm. So you see all those requirements, all those priorities, they fly into to different quarters throughout the fiscal year, where our straddle program we're showing there in the fourth quarter, right? So our goal, I said before, was to get to, through the third quarter to be 100% of the program, and then we can spend the end of the year buying down next year's program. So that's the goal. But the key is we're going to fly those in to different quarters, and that's what we're going to track to. And then from that gives us a burn rate. And so this is really important for the FMers, the resources folks at the bases, because now we have an idea of how we're doing and how we're performing on a whole as a program. So we take all those obligations that we expect, it gives us a burn rate, and we can track to that whether we're over or under executing. Another key piece to this is that now we can go forward and ask for the right amount of quarterly authority, so that when you get your project ready to award and you ask us for money, well, the money's there when you need it, and so you can award it. You know, that prevents us from having to delay bids and everything else, and it's all about planning on the front end and laying out expectations and tracking to them. And then from that we get an actual burn rate, right? So ideally we're overperforming. That green line is above the blue line. That means we're obligating earlier than we had planned. That's a good thing. But in the past, you know, at the end of year, what happens to all those requirements that didn't get funded? When we were set up in MAJCOMs and they were doing their own unfunded drill every year, we would get a certain amount of requirements out there and we'd track them, and knowing full well that they may or may not be funded at the end of the year, right? So you had to make a decision at the base. An engineering flight chief and with his contracting officer, they had to decide, well, you know, this is close to the line, let's put some resources towards it and give it a try. But some of them we just didn't do, right? Well, that's not the case anymore because we have a 2-year program. So any of those requirements that don't get funded at the end of the year, we're going to carry them over. And so there's not going to be any wasted effort on the engineer side of the house or the contracting side of the house working these packages, because they're going to get awarded, if not at the end of the year, they're going to get awarded in the first quarter of the next fiscal year, which from the FM side, again, is another good product of this, because we have early obligations in the first quarter. Typically, we're cleaning up the prior year stuff that first quarter, not really obligating anything. Well, through this process and a deliberate approach, we're going to be able to obligate early. All right, so way ahead. At any one time, we're working 3 CTO cycles, right, concurrently, and I have them laid out here. So calendar year 2014, you know, the top line, FY14 CTO, we just published that. We know it was late to need, and I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide, but we're in execution mode. Okay, FY15 cycle, all the folks at the bases are putting together their targeting list right now. They're going out there, identifying those high-risk requirements. Some have already submitted to the MAJCOMs, and the MAJCOMs are taking a look at them across the MAJCOM and developing their integrated priority list. And then on the back end, FY16 CTO, we've already started refining our business rules and working on those business rules for the next cycle. So again, broken glass right now as we get there, but you see in calendar year 2015, you see a battle rhythm starting to merge. And so while we plan to approve the 15 CTO in July and start execution, the end state goal is to have that approved tax day in the 16 CTO approved tax day of 2015, so that, no kidding, we can really start putting resources towards those 16 requirements and maybe buy a bunch of them down at the end of the year, but if not, we'll have them ready the first day of the next fiscal year. All right, so where you might have all the questions, or I'm assuming you might have a lot of questions or complaints, and we expect that. So FY14 CTO cycle. So obviously it was approved. Hopefully it's been socialized with you. It was sent out to all the A47s and distributed from there. But bottom line is we worked closely with AFCEC CL, with our civilian leader, along with SAF FM, the folks that hold the money, as well as SAF AQ, the contracting folks, and we signed a tripartite agreement that says on it up front that you have authority to advertise all of these requirements on the attached list. Okay, so one of the feedbacks that we received is unclear authority. We thought we were being clear. Some folks in the field, some contracting offices said, nope, signed by CE doesn't count. We need signatures from everyone. So we fixed that by publishing the CTO. And the other piece of that was inconsistent plan, right? Well, what's on the list, what's not on the list, and a lot of that had to do with sequestration and budget cuts and everything, and we understand that, and hopefully you do as well. But bottom line is we did not present from the strategic level a consistent message to you guys so that we're all on the same page and you guys know what to execute and what to shoot for. And the other piece there, clearly not collaborative, and we didn't have time. But as you saw in the previous slide, the next cycle will be. And so we ask that, we know there's going to be broken glass. We ask that you work with us the best we can to make 14 a success. So with respect to the CTO and the targeting piece of that and the weaponering and time on target, weaponering, we looked at ACEs. right? So for stuff that we did not have intel on, we looked at ACEs, and we trusted ACEs as being correct. A lot of the requirements, though, thankfully, we have been coordinating with you guys already in terms of who you want to do it and who's going to be doing it and what type of vehicle. So a combination of those two things are how we laid in the execution agent for this cycle. But again, if it's wrong, let us know and we can fix it. We did the best with what we had, the available information that we had. Time on target. How did we decide those? So this is the process that was used to decide the time on target for this cycle. If we had issued you authority to advertise prior to February, then your time on target is 30 April 14. And that's based on the business rules that were published and the timelines laid out there, that you wouldn't request authority to advertise until you were ready to hand your project off to contracting. They'd already seen it a couple times and were ready and understood that it was a complete package. So based on that pretense, we issued you authority, and you should be ready by 30 April. The other date's 30 April. If we're going to the Corps or NAFAC, the goal is to have them MIPPER the money by 30 April. We understand that that isn't an obligation or not a contract award, and we're not tracking it as such, but it is an obligation for us and will help us in the program, because we really need to show obligations right now across the enterprise, because we're at risk of losing money because the folks up at the Pentagon don't think we can execute. So anything that's going to those guys, let's send them the money now. Send your request for fund into us so that we can send them the money and get those dollars obligated. Obviously, you still need to track towards award prior to 30 September, but we want to get the money obligated now. And then all other requirements that we had not issued authority on, we used the programmed amount and published contracting timelines from the 772nd here, 80 to 150 days based on that size of the requirement and the type of the requirement to lay in those dates. So again, having no visibility on how much you had worked on a requirement so far on the CE side and developing a package, we had to take our best guess based on that data and what had been socialized in the past. And that's how those dates were decided. So the corrective action plan piece of that. If you can't get there, we want a corrective action plan within 7 days that is signed by the CE squadron commander as well as the contracting squadron commander, that says that we are both on board to executing this requirement by a date that is established out there. Again, we understand that some of those dates may not be reasonable or attainable. If that is the case, communicate with us, talk to us. Get the corrective action plan out there and let us know what your plan is to get it awarded, and when you, no kidding, will have it awarded. But we want you to track to those dates as best you can. But the key piece of this is we need visibility from the centralized perspective on the whole program and how we're doing. We're really worried about obligations and meeting our 80-20 rule at the end of July, and we need feedback from you guys that are actually doing this decentralized execution to tell me whether or not you can make it or we're going to make it. So that's the key, is track to those dates, but work with us, and we'll work with you. So 14 out of the way. 15 cycle, a lot on this slide. I'll kind of breeze through it, and I talked a little bit about it on the calendar. Right now, we're planning on pulling the targeting list in 15 May, right? So everyone at the bases and MAJCOMs are working that. We're going to pull that targeting list 15 May. We're going to convene a CTO working group. Right then, actually, we're starting now to look at some of those requirements to start applying the weaponering and the time on target criteria. But our goal is to have that done by 1 June, and then we're going to send it out to you guys in the field and see if it meets the mark. And if there's a reason why the method or agent or anything doesn't make sense to you guys, well, we want your feedback. But bottom line is we're going to take that feedback mid-June and get it socialized and hopefully have this same process approved for FY15 on 1 July of this year. The CTO working group, I referenced it up there. That's going to consist of all the key stakeholders in the process, essentially. And our main role as a working group is going to be looking at the program as a whole. We're going to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of authority out on the street to meet our obligation targets, right? So if we have cancellations, bid overages, etc., we want to be able to adjust fire throughout the fiscal year. And so we plan on publishing the CTO at the beginning of the year, but we're going to do quarterly updates based on the best information that we have at that time so that you all know where we stand. And the other piece of that, we're going to be tracking the time on target dates. And so if we're missing those time on target dates and we're adding requirements to the high-risk portfolio, well, we're going to track those, and we're going to help where we can, but we want to have visibility on those so that we have an idea if they're going to make it or not. Time on target, though, key there. And a foot stomper, the dates are tight for FY14. They're not going to be for FY15. We're going to publish the CTO 1 July, and we're not going to expect the first requirements to be awarded till the end of the first quarter. Right? So you're going to have up to 6 months to have those requirements awarded. Now, obviously, we'd like to get some awarded earlier so that we could buy them down in FY14 at end of year, but the key time on target date, you are going to have time to get there, for regardless of what the requirement is. So if you don't miss the date, though, you're at risk, and that is what we need out there. We need that milestone, but we also need to put you at risk. So if you miss it and you can't correct it within 30 days, then your project is going to move below the line and not going to be considered until we hit fourth quarter and end of year, if at all. So I mean that's the key out there, and that's a key milestone or a key takeaway from this is that we want you to hit those dates. We need you to hit those dates and work towards those dates. And look, what's that? Yep, another piece of that is, and I mentioned it briefly, is first come, first serve. So just because your target date is third quarter, that doesn't mean that you need to wait that long to get there. If you can get there sooner, then more power to you. We're going to fund requirements as they come in, as the best that we, based on the funds availability. Another key date there is if you're a third quarter award and we're dealing with sequestration or something like that in the future, well, we might not have the dollars immediately, and the secondary and tertiary impacts of that is that, well, you might have to extend bids until we do have dollars, and that's a pain. So the key is first come, first serve, get your stuff ready early and meet those time on target dates. All right, the other piece that we've received some feedback so far on, and we just kind of wanted to lay it out there for you, and it doesn't show up perfectly on the DCO, but weaponering and how that's going to be done. So the first step there is let's let the requirement drive the method, not the process. And we laid out kind of the 3 different construction methods that we typically do out there. Some that aren't included on there might be service contracts or something else, and they'd probably fall in that first, in that number 1. But the single discipline, simple scope stuff, the SABRE IDIQ type requirements, where our PMs can write a simple statement of work or do a joint measurement and we can go, well, get after it. We don't need to have much involvement in those at all other than executing them at the base, because that's the bread and butter. If we have a simple, well-defined front-end requirement, let's get after it as a design build, if it's less than $5 million. But the key is that we want to choose the appropriate requirement method and not let the process. And what I mean by that is in the past when we had an unfunded program, when the MAJCOMs would publish that mid-year and your projects might or might not be on the list, maybe you had a couple on there, well, the goal is to get it executed by end of year, right? And to do that, if we were lucky, we might have done a conceptual design, but more often than not, we had to go design build because the timing made us do that. And so we didn't necessarily have the most defined requirements, and as a result, on the back end, we're dealing with cost growth, time growth, and that's a pain for us for the C folks, but it's also a pain for the contracting folks that are maintaining that contract file, and we're going through mod after mod because we didn't do our work on the front end. Now that we have a centralized approach, a 2-year IPL, a consistent funded process, not unfunded, we can be deliberate and we can execute the high-risk targets at the right time with the right resources, and that means being deliberate about designing the requirement up to the appropriate level. It could be 65, it could be 100% design, but doing that on the front end, tighten up the requirements, and then going into bid build that next fiscal year. Some keys in there, though, that we want to foot stomp. We're going to expect, and so when you're planning and you're prioritizing your workloads and laying in ACEs what you plan on doing or how you plan on doing that, we're going to expect historic facility renovations to be design bid build because we know we have trouble with those. Right? There's a lot of complexity to those, so let's take our time up front. Also, requirements greater than $5 million. We want those to be design, bid, build unless there's a compelling reason not to. And obviously I'm talking more on facility renovation type stuff, but if you have a reason why you don't need to go design, bid, and build, then let us know. But that's kind of how we're going to lay it in. And then requirements greater than $10 million, we call it a simplified analysis of alternatives. And then RD2s for you that have done MILCON in the past. We want to do some of that up front, and we want to spend the dollars up front to make sure that that's right. Make sure we're doing the best of the available options to address a requirement, and it's worth investing on the front end to make sure that the back end we're successful. And so the key to this, the CTO allows us to plan ahead, and we can do it right. So you don't need to game the system. All right, so once we have that, the construction method, now it's execution agent, right? And I talked briefly about this, and we call it the waterfall here. But the key is we want you at the bases to do the best you can. So if you can do all your requirements that are on the IPL, more power to you. You guys are there on site, boots on the ground. There's a lot of efficiencies there. You know your base, you know the requirement, you know the customer. But there is goodness in that in terms of executing the project. So on the front end, if you plan on executing your requirement, plug that into ACES and let us know that's the plan. And in the case that you don't have the capability or the capacity, well, now let's look at the other options. And that's where we hope you'll come to AFCEC and AFICA. There are times where we're really good at doing requirements and being the agent of choice. If we have a PM forward in an area, we already have the resources in place and the capability and capacity. There's certain things out there that AFCEC is good at. Complex facility renovations, maybe airfield related requirements. Well, if that's the case, then think about us to target those requirements. And then the last piece is, we have some bases that have a limited engineering contracting capacity, and so we have been historically doing a lot of requirements for them. Well, we plan to continue to do that. But in the event that AFCEC, we reach our capacity capability, then we want to go to the strategic use of the non-Air Force agents, the Corps, NAFAC, GSA, whatever the right reason is to use them. And there are many reasons, but maybe they have a resident office locally there that has advanced capabilities and reach back. Maybe they've been previously involved in other phases of a requirement, or they have a large MILCON program. Or maybe it's a center of excellence where we can tap into that. But the key is we're going to assess and add the appropriate agent, but we want to maximize the use of our Air Force available resources first. And the last piece of that, once we have an agent, once we have a construction method, we're gonna use the appropriate contracting vehicle. And the key takeaway here is that there are a lot of contract vehicles out there. So you guys are really good at IDIQs and Sabres, and we have those vehicles. Maximize the use of them. If we can do that for everything, I would be happy. If I looked down when I was the engineering flight chief and my program was all IDIQ and Sabre, I knew it was going to be a good year, right? Because we're good at that. But in the event that it's a little complex, you need design, something else, well, come to us. We have a design A&E available to you. You don't need to have your local A&E contract. You don't need to do that every year. We have one that serves the enterprise-wide where we can provide those services to you. If you have the capability there, but you're running out of capacity, your PMs are just running a little thin, and you need some oversight on a project, well, we can also offer you Title II support through the centralized program and through the vehicles that we have at our fingertips. And then lastly, if your MAC or your MAJCOM at your base is running thin, running out of capacity, you need something else, well, come to us. We got the SATOC, we got the HERC, and we have those vehicles available to you as well. But the key is, again, selecting the right vehicle to get the job done. And you probably see a theme through all of this. It's all about front-end planning, teaming up with contracting, teaming up with us here at AFCEC and AFICA, but teaming up on the front end to lay out the expectations, to lay out the process of how we're going to execute our requirements, and that makes the execution of it easy. All right, so last slide here, and I touched on it a little bit. 15 May, this is the CTO for 15 May. We're working on weaponering right now. So if you hear from us, if we're reaching out to you asking questions, then please get back to us and let us know, and so we can start that communication. As long as we're communicating, we're gonna have a much better and easier to execute plan. 1 June to 15 June, draft CTO and CORD. out to you guys to tell us where we whiffed, and then we're going to go through the governance schedule and get it approved at the end of July. The other piece of that, the question that we had received is kind of who's the decision authorities, right? So strategic intent on the front end, we're relying on the 3 stars to tell us what's important to them, and then we're going to go execute that based on what's important to them. Targeting, half A7C right now is approval authority of the IPL. So they're the ones that look at the risk model, they're the ones that approve that and approve the priorities established. Weaponering CTO, that's going to be the tripartite group that we talked about between contracting, FM, and us at the strategic level. Of course, with your coordination, we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be the ones that are approving the CTO, our leadership, not us, I should say. And then business rules, again, this is a big piece to that. It's evolving. Centralization is in its infancy. So if there's something that you guys are doing out there, a best practice that we're missing through the CTO process, let us know. We want to take advantage of that and take advantage of that for the Air Force. All right, I think that's it. That's my spiel on the CTO process. Any questions out there on anything we've said? Or do we have questions? Oh, I think so.
I want to answer the AMC one last. I want to do that one. Get the rest. And Wayne's going to do one about Corps of Engineers versus AFCEC.
Okay.
So that first one. You want to do it, Wayne?
Try to keep track of what we answered in the chat. This one, you can read it out loud. You read it from there.
Yep. All right. So the first question from Don Morgan at JBSA Blackland. He says, Corps versus AFCEC is an issue with the Corps. It's more like a fire and forget, where we are paying for services we aren't manned for, whereas AFCEC is more like hand deliverably, where the base has to do a great amount of work and AFCEC has been just assembling. Will this be the model forward?
Let's talk about how we're going to get better.
Hey Don, this is Major Wayne Kinsel. Right now I'm in charge of execution for AFCEC. I think we can talk a little bit more about this assembling on the backside. But yeah, we stood up not too long ago to do a lot of this centralized execution for the Air Force. And we just talked to General Green last week, and we want to be the agent of choice. And when we were explaining it to General Green, we want to be the agent of choice between us, the Corps, and NAVFAC. We don't want to take away work from the bases. We want to optimize your capacity at the base level first, but then AFCEC's going to take that on. I think what you are alluding to in your question is that you feel that if AFCEC's going to take on the project, the base has a lot of work to do up front. And I would definitely like to talk to you more on the backside or offline, so we can kind of clarify this, and then we can maybe get an answer out to the field. But I seem to disagree on that. We're working under the full services model, where we'll have a core here at AFCEC, and then we're going to put a Title II at the base for large projects and try to take the workload off of your people when it does come to AFCEC. So
Very similar model to the Corps.
Okay.
Great answer.
Next question was from Don as well. Need clarification of agent selection. This year we saw several disconnects between base expectation of agent versus AFCEC view of agent and final decision. So I touched on that a little bit, and I don't know how early this was on it was early on. Hopefully I've answered that, Don. But bottom line, maximize base first, then maximize AFCEC before we send stuff outside the Air Force. And that is the process on the front end. All right, next one. So apparently there's quite a few that have been answered in the chat box. The next one that hasn't. So is this guaranteed funding for straddle program? So yeah, good question. So I put straddle on there, but our goal and the whole purpose of a 2-year IPL is that the straddle program goes away. And what I mean by that is that when we get into the 4th quarter, that straddle program is going to be next year's program. So this year, for example, when we get that preliminary list of requirements, we're going to look down at and identify any of those FY15 construction requirements that we think we can get at potentially this year. So those could be SABRE or IDIQ requirements, smaller target, smaller dollar amount requirements. We're going to identify those now for potential end-of-year execution. The other piece of that is the FY16 design. right? We can do design task orders quickly, so we want to get after those this fourth quarter, and that will become our straddle program in the years in future years. So it's going to be a rolling list of requirements, and so there will never be that straddle fill or kill program that we've been dealing with in the past. It will be a funded program. The question is whether it's funded end of year this year or first quarter next year. All right, from Mr. Ashton at Space Command, will the MAJCOM bases get an opportunity to reclama the 14 time on target dates, or are these locked in now? Well, so dates are locked in, but come back at us and let us know areas that need to be adjusted. So those are the dates that we're shooting for, and we ask that you do everything in your power to hit those dates. But if you can't, then come talk to us. Hopefully that answers that. Yep.
I'll just add that
in FY14, some of those April dates look pretty scary, but we tried to limit those to things that should have been started already. And the one big difference between time on target this year and next year, next year it'll have a lot of, and if you miss your target date, you're going to be high risk of losing funding. You'll be at risk this year, but really those time on target, if you're 30 April and you can't make it, those are the ones where we want an early read from you, that early corrective action plan to say, hey, we don't want to wait till September to find out that the acquisition strategy is falling apart at the seams, and you just don't have the capacity to do it. So those time on target dates are to open that bridge with you and get that corrective action plan to make sure we have a good plan. We will be more flexible this year than next year because we did this really fast.
Okay. Next question, is there a list of AFCEC contracts?
we're working on getting that link.
And we're working on that. The question, we're working on that. We do have that out there. We will get a link out to you through the integration program group distro that hopefully they can socialize with the field. Oh, looks like AFCEC, it looks like our enterprise procurement folks posted that down there for us. So if you look in the chat box, that link is now there. All right, Don Morgan again, need info for our base cons folks to use your contracts. Again, I think I just answered that. It's there now, the link. Take a look at that and let us know if you have any questions on what's out there so we can start that conversation. For Mr. Fitzpatrick, will an official weaponeering task go to the wings? And the answer to that is no. So based on the business rules, a lot of that weaponeering data we're requesting from the bases and the wings is included on the front end when they develop the target list. So they're supposed to put in their construction method, they're supposed to put in their agent stuff and all that on the front end. So we're going to be looking for that data on the front end to develop our straw man in terms of weaponeering. All right, next question. How will pop-ups be managed in the 2-year process? And I briefly touched on that. Emergent requirements, that's the purpose of our CTO working group. So we have a process for an emergent requirement that gets submitted, and if it's approved, it gets inserted into the program. Well, the CTO working group is going to track that on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're getting authority out to those requirements and tracking them as part of the program. With the 2-year plan, how are you going to do ATA in first quarter of next fiscal year when funds aren't currently available? Specifically, are you going to do the tripartite agreement for funding assurance? The answer to that is yes. So that's the whole purpose of having the CE folks, or the requirements owner, I should say, the contracting folks, and SAF FM at the strategic level coming together and agreeing on the plan forward centrally so that we can have that authority and give it out to you in the field. But yes, the FY15 CTO will say exactly that. It'll provide authority for those requirements. All right. From Charles Carnley, says, will this ATA process eliminate the need for MAJCOM facility ATAs? And yeah, and the answer to that is if it's part of the list, if it's part of that process, or the centralized program, then yeah, that is your authority. You have the authority you need to go execute the requirement. Now, if it's a small sustainment requirement, unfunded, that's being done through the MAJCOM, you still need to rely on them locally to provide the authority you need. Okay, next question. Keep going, Brandon. Just to confirm, a project on the list this year for execution that could not make it will be funded first quarter next year. And the answer to that is yes, with caveats.
Well, what does it mean could not make it?
So that's the big question there, is the caveat being why could you not make
They
it?
can't obligate this.
So if you can't get there because we didn't do a very good job on the front end and going through the project and developing it, then maybe not. If we got through the acquisition process, we had some bid overages, we couldn't get the bid, the price where we needed it by the end of the year, then yes. But it depends on the reasoning behind that.
It's ready to go this year. We run out of money.
And the Colonel Meeker just clarified too. If it's ready to go at end of year and we run out of money, then yes. Again, we're going to fund that first quarter next year. All right, next one. So how long is the contractor required to hold their pricing with respect to straddle? So our goal is, again, I think it depends. This year's going to be a little different, but in the future, it wouldn't be any longer than a typical period of 30 to 60 days. So if you're meeting your time on target date, and we expect to have funds by the first 30 days or the appropriate amount of quarterly authority that next quarter if we can't award you in the quarter that you were supposed to hit. Now, if you miss your time on target date and now you're on the high risk profile and you miss that second date, then we'll expect you to do what you need to do locally to extend bids until fourth quarter. And so that could mean you might need to provide some local resources to pay the contractor to extend bids or whatever, but that's what we expect if you want your project considered in the fourth quarter. Is contracting authority valid until 31 December so that we can carry the bids until end of first quarter FY15?
Yes, and there's specific language in the CTO document.
Yes, and there's specific language in the CTO document that says that. So the goal is to have your requirement ready for end of year award, but have bids extended through first quarter in the event that we can't get there this year. Do the business rules in the field discuss weaponeering and the timeline? Are you finding business rules are an effective way to task the field? Colonel Meeker would like to answer that, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Good question.
Good question, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
So
the CE folks on the line know that we drove a lot of work this spring with some business rules on how we're going to prioritize projects.
We
weren't sure that was the best way to communicate it. And so the CTO is actually our attempt at refining that somewhat. So our goal is to have the detailed, the very tactical level requirements and criteria web-based, whether that's in a playbook or some kind of official web-based guidance, and then for the actual communication with leadership and the actual tasking. Right, so kind of two different questions here. We're going to explain it through processes, mapped out processes on web pages. We're going to task it through something similar like what you just saw with the CTO memorandum, where it was really that's basically a policy letter memorandum. Again, we did the FY14 one very quickly. When we published the FY15 construction tasking order, it'll not only come with those signatures of approval and authority, but documents within there that outline clearly what those tasks are. And then we'll flow that through A47s and like feedback on, if you're out there and you're struggling to communicate this to leadership, let us know. We've looked at doing it through TMT, and obviously through this memorandum to A47s, A67s, and the FOAs. So that we're trying to get better at that. Let us know if you have feedback.
All right, the next question, is there modified method to do small Small contract mods, basically, other than the emergent requirement method. Major Kinzel's gonna hit on that, and
So that's, yeah, so it's just like in our business rules, if it's a mandatory requirement, not a user requested change, then yes, we will be able to get additional funds for those mods.
but if it's a user requested change, then while we can modify the contract, we won't be planning on expending any centralized dollars towards that requirement. So we expect you to bring money to the table for a user funded change. All right, next question. Can AFCEC develop RFPs for projects like USACE does? USACE does. Currently, we will send planning and design fee to USACE to develop an RFP and solicit the project. This is a good complement to our contracted engineering services.
We do that. We need to work with 772nd. I was going to talk to you about that after the meeting.
So that's an initiative that is potentially in the works, but we don't have a solid answer for you now. Sorry if you're experiencing audio problems. We're trying to correct those as we go.
All right, next question is, if a base didn't get any design projects on list, how will we prep for FY16? And I'm not sure. Yeah, so that question, we have not issued any design dollars for FY16 requirements yet. In mid-May, when we pull that list, hopefully you have populated your requirements. Any requirement out there that you need design dollars on, you've updated ACEs accordingly. And if you've done that, when we pull that list, and if your project looks like it's in the window for FY16 execution, we're going to identify those designs then. So you haven't missed the boat for FY16. Any other questions out there?
All right, so let's answer the one we were saving till last.
So from AMC, so this is really all about issuing ATA earlier in the cycle or year. If so, wouldn't it be easier to explain that in simple terms over one or two slides versus talking about bombs and targeting?
All right, so there I was, right? All you're sitting in conference room now, pretending you're pilots, flying with your hands, and probably poking a little bit of fun at us for this CTO thing. We had fun with it, but I can tell you, if this were about communicating to engineers and contracting folks, it would have been a lot simpler. But the times are changing, and there's a lot happening in the big Air Force, as you all know, and especially here, we feel it here every day within the centralized portfolio and managing your money, right? We're managing your requirements, prioritizing your requirements, working with the installations, and this is built for your installation commanders, and this is built for the MAJCOM commanders who see some of the centralization as loss of authority, loss of funds. This is for them, to show them, all of us, you and us, contracting and CE and FM, as this Installation Mission Support Center comes together and centralization grows. It's happening, folks. We have a responsibility to make our process transparent, fair, mission-focused, and understandable by our installation commanders, by our MAJCOM commanders. So I hope that the engineers who would prefer, sketch paper, and the contracting folks, we like to pick on each other. The contracting folks would like us to recite the FAR to them, I know, but hopefully this makes sense to you, and hopefully it makes sense to Air Force leadership, and it helps you communicate with Air Force leadership. So you have to bear with us on some of the CTO stuff, but it's for the benefit of all of us as we communicate to leadership our process and our change. All right, Don, again, ACES requirements be published. Yes, they're published now. Go to the business rules, look at the ACES data management guide. Everything that we're going to be used for weaponeering is in that data guide now. So make sure that those fields are populated so that when we pull the data, we have what we need. Any other questions? I appreciate the feedback from Everett Reynolds, best CTO so far. one of one, so thank you. If that's it, again,
let your folks know if they missed it. We're going to do this again at 1500 today to hopefully capture our PACAF folks and anyone else that